Awesome. Well, ladies who are and gents who are on the line, so great to see you as usual. Happy Sunday. Today is April 21st, 2024. And today we are painting a beautiful spring flowers inspiration. And we talk a lot about doing watercolors every once in a while in these classes. If you have access to watercolors or if you wanted to play with watercolors, and we're going to use today's class to do that. So if you have watercolors and you want to have some fun and play with us, feel free to use your watercolors. If you don't have watercolors, it's okay. You don't need watercolors to participate. You can use whatever you have on hand. So no big deal. You can follow the same tips and tricks and kind of techniques from a form perspective as you wish. So let's see here. I'm just pulling up my inspiration here on my computer so I can reference a visual along with you all. All right, perfect. All right, so some of the supplies that you'll need are, if you're using watercolors, grabbing those watercolor paints. You can see mine are right over here. I'm going to turn off this other video for distractions. Perfect. I have an array of small brushes I'm going to be using. These are the same brushes I use for acrylics. You can use different brushes, but you don't have to. We're all being playful here, and you can grab small to large brushes. I grabbed all like pretty small ones for today. So I think these will be just fine. If I need to go and dig around and find others as we paint, I certainly can. But I have a handful here. I am painting with watercolor paper. And I did use painter's tape to paint to outline a square. So the painter's tape is optional. You don't need to do that. But if you wanted to kind of have a white border around, you certainly could. In addition to the paints, the watercolor paints, I have this. This is actually the top that goes to this watercolor tray. This is where I'm going to be mixing some of my paint colors. So if I have greens or reds or pinks or purples or blues, I can do that within these wells quite easily. So if you have a normal plate, you can do it on a normal plate too. You don't need those wells if you don't have access to them. And then you'll need 2 cups of water. I love to reuse my red cups to be resourceful here. So 1 cup I'm going to keep clean, God help me. And 1 cup I'm going to use to rinse the paint off, okay? So we have to hold ourselves accountable to using the 1 cup for clean water and then the other cup for dirty water, rinsing your brushes off. Okay. And that's it, really. I have a paper towel for any messes. But we can jump in and have some fun here. One of the things I was gonna share with you as we get started, and give me a thumbs up, you all can hear me okay. Perfect, thanks ladies. Is a little bit of, I'm not going to go into too many technical watercolor techniques. I really want this to be an opportunity for you to be playful with the subject and just kind of getting used to watercolors. But there's a couple different techniques of doing wetting the surface of your paper and then applying a wet brush with the paint on it. So it's called wet on wet. And this is the type of look and feel that you get here, okay? Then you could take your wet watercolor brush and apply it just on the dry. So you can see you have a little bit more control over using a wet brush with paint on it on a dry surface. So you can see how it's more of like an acrylic. You can see your brush strokes. Up here, you can see the different techniques of wet on wet and wet on dry as well. So it's about like letting it dry a little bit, how wet your paper is, how dry your paper is. So we'll do a little bit of both today so you can play with it. We're not going to overthink it by any means, but I think that you can see some of the differences here. So I wanted to show you that visual as we get started and going. And then we'll play with the opacity, like how much paint pigment are we playing with, and how much water we're using as we're mixing colors. So one of the first things that we're going to do to get started is to look at the colors that we want to use for our picture today. So for me, I'm looking at, pink. There's pink flowers. You could do purple flowers. I may do purple flowers instead of pink flowers. Maybe I'll start with some pink flowers and then I'll add a little purple to them. So I might do my flower placement first and then put all those greens around those flowers. Okay. So we're really just going to jump in and have some fun to get started. I'm just going to start by taking a small brush of choice. This is a number 3 brush, so it's kind of like a middle of the road size. And I want you to find a color that you want for one of your flowers. So for me, I'm just going to jump in and I'm just going to grab a little bit of the red. And I'm just going to start putting it right here on my plate. And you always want to mix colors. I'm going to make this pretty potent red so you can see it. And I'm dipping it in, and you can use the water and mix it around. It's kind of like priming your paint, very similar to acrylic. Priming it on your plate first, finding that right color and tone. So I've dirtied this water right here. So I'm going to keep the water on my right clean. So for me, this is very pinky reddish. So I'm going to clean this, and I have a little bit of white. I'm going to grab a little bit of white. You may not have white paint, but if you have white watercolor paint, you can kind of clean off your brush and you can kind of soften it a little bit. If you don't have that, it's totally fine. But you can see how it's softening it just a little bit, which is kind of fun. And I'm going to do red, pink, purplish kind of colored flowers. And then I'm going to do kind of the green. So red and green are complementary colors. Purple and green will also look good, but you can do anything you want. So I'm playing around with the pigment here and I'm just mixing it around. And once you feel like you're ready, I'm going to grab a little more water. Once you feel like you have enough paint prepared on your plate here, and by stirring it, you can see it's really breaking up all those like little paint pigments, which is really nice. You can figure out, well, where do I want to put some of these flowers? And you can start to play around with some of the shapes. So I'm going to do like 4 petaled flowers. So I'm just going to have some fun. And I'm holding my hand back a little bit. Maybe I'll get a little bit of water on my brush. And maybe fill in some of these flowers with a little bit of water so they're a little more loose in color. So you can be playful here because you can get your paper really wet. So you can be playful with how much pigment you bring into certain areas. I'm going to hold my brush back a little bit. And I'm kind of making my petals, holding my brush back a little further. Just have some fun with your flower shapes. Try adding in a little heavier of the pink or red pigment into one area versus another. And I'm having fun. I'm not overthinking it. You want more clear water? You can bring more clear water right into this. Because this can be really thick and wet because it will still dry. The other thing you can do while this is wet is if I want to bring in a little purple, you can get a little bit of purple on your plate going. And I could just do a little touch of purple on some of these edges. So watercolor is really cool. It's because while a color is wet, you can kind of add a secondary color. So I'm going to be playful. I'm going to add, I don't know, an odd number of these flowers. I'm going to start with 1 and I'm just going to work my way around. And they're all going to be fairly the same size. You can change the shape up a little bit. But they're all going to be in the same family. So play with any techniques you wish. If you want to make the middle of these petals a little lighter, dip your brush in your water cup and bring in some water. If you want to get a little more paint pigment, you can add in a little bit more, even a little more paint pigment on the edges of these flowers. You can come back into the other one down here and add a little paint pigment. You can see how cool that is down there. I'll bring it a little closer so you can see it. So be playful. Bring in a little purple. Bring in a couple of the darker reds. I'm just playing with a 4-petal flower. But play with how much pigment, how much pigment, bringing in a secondary color. It's so much fun. One of the things I love about watercolors is that you can experiment by bringing in different, like a purple along the way. Again, using your side palette, kind of prep a purple. And I'm just doing little ton of touches of purple on the edges of these leaves. You could do darker purple. Again, this is totally up to you, but it will start to kind of blend in. If it's wet enough, it will blend in, which is really fun. It will kind of jet stream out. There's no right or wrong way of doing things with watercolors. So you can kind of switch back and forth in between the red and the purple. Mine's like it's kind of like I don't want to say like a fuchsia pink, but I don't know. I'm just playing. But I'm playing with the lighter and the darker contrasts of color. If you feel like the pigment is too rich, you can easily bring some plain water into your flowers and it will kind of calm it down a little bit. But the water will help create the blend. And the blend is that transfusion between one color and another. And that's a pretty boring looking flower. So let's fix this. I might add in a couple smaller petals here and there to make it just look a little more unnatural. It looks a little too fixed for me. So you can add in a couple of small petals if you want to. There, that's a little bit better. You can always leave a little white space if you wanted to in between some of these leaves. I might do that for like the next couple flowers. But I'm just doing a smattering of light pinks and reds. And I might just do like a half of a petal kind of coming off the top up here. Like there's a partial flower on. So you can think about where you want to hold, where you want to hold any white space. We haven't done too much of that yet. So let's see here. There's some cute like little flowers here that are tucked in with a little center with like some of these long loopies. Some of these are tucked in. So this is your art. You could do anything you want today. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to let me know. I'm just doing some daisy-like petals kind of hanging down. And with watercolor, there's a lot of techniques built in where you let things dry and you come back to it. Very similar to acrylic. I tucked in some of those. Those are cute. But I'm going to focus back on these again. So I'm just going to I'm looking for a balance of color. Again, I don't want to just paint like it's acrylic. I want to play with the water. I want to play with the light and the darkness of the pigment. I'm going to play with bringing in a secondary color, right? That purple, so pretty. Where do I want the darker pink? Where do I want the lighter pink? Bringing in water just to kind of fill it in. You can hold white space where you want as well. Kind of your choice. Oh, I just brought some like really dark contrasting red down here to this one. Let's see what that does. And I took a little bit of that in up here too, just to see what happens. Again, I'm here to experiment. It's always fun. Probably make some of you nervous. But sometimes that's when these happy little accidents happen. I just took some really punchy red. If you don't pre-mix it, you never know what's going to happen with regards to pigment. And you can see I didn't pre-mix it. And I could use my finger to smudge this and maybe do some little dots here and there. Look at that, my finger. I'm just having fun. But you can rinse your brush and you can always move, though the paint is wet. You can move this pigment around. You can watch it move, which is not a quality you get with acrylic. So any of this pigment, I can just move it with the tip of my brush. If you don't like the way something looks, just add a little water on your brush and move it around if you can. I'm just kind of dancing around the edges of the petals to see where I want the pigment to fall. And I'm going to get a little purple, mix it on my plate first with a little water, touching a little purple down here to this flower. If anyone has any questions, don't hesitate to ask. I might put a little bit of, I have a dark purple. I'm going to make a dark purple over here. I'm going to put a little dark purple in the center of these ones. So you can see some of the paints I'm using. And there's just a little bit of a dark purple in some of these centers. If it's too dark purple, you can kind of touch it with your finger and kind of clean it up a little bit. You can grab a paper towel and blot something if you don't like the way something looks. Might put like a little bit of like a light purple on the inside of these. Nah, I don't really like that. So I'm just going to blot that up. Doesn't matter. It's always okay to experiment. I might do a little bit of a light purple fill, but we'll see. But just take a few minutes to play with some of these introductory flowers and just find a balance from one area to another. So for me, I'm focusing on these pink flowers. I'm doing some small and some big. Now I've done some bigger ones, so I might put a couple smaller ones down here to have a little bit of a balance. I do like the greens that were used. So it's okay just to do a few bits of work and kind of come back to an area or two. Maybe I'll do some down here that are a little more separated. Maybe there's a little more white space. I haven't really been playing with the white space aspect of the watercolors too much. So I could just start by doing some outlines like that. Then I could have some fun just kind of filling it in. And consider, hey, where if I want to leave any white space, where would I want to leave it? So it's always a fun thing to think about. And there's a lot of techniques for watercolor. We're not going to go through everything. It's just our first class. But it's just about becoming familiar around how to apply the paint, how to manipulate the paint once it's down here. And trying those contrasting differences with a little bit of a darker red, a little bit of a purple, tucked in on the edges of these petals, having light and dark areas is a really fun thing to try. But mixing those colors so you're not in utter shock on your palette and in your wells first is a really good idea. I played with a little bit of white space on this one. Get a little bit of a tie-dye effect. And for anyone who's watching the recording and you're not a part of the live class, you're welcome to write or comment with any questions. I'm happy to support your work along the way. But I am just playing with, you don't want to overdo it. So kind of playing with the lights and darks. Some of these flowers are they're pretty rudimentary. So I'm just I'll do a couple more, just small ones. And this one will be kind of half on, half off. And you can fill it in again as you wish if you're using purples, if you're using reds. And you can let it dry. You don't need to go crazy. I'm gonna let that one dry. It has a little bit more white in it. I might tuck in a couple more of these fun little flowers, just maybe one more down here. And I'm going to play with the direction. So let's see. So if I have a round circle this way, maybe I'll do a couple of petals this way. I love using the fine tip of a brush just to be playful with the direction. These are kind of half flowers. I did a little purple on the inside here. I use my finger to smudge. But again, play with rinsing your brush, going back in and manipulating what you've done. So rinsing your brush with clean water, come in and manipulate, bring in and fill in maybe some of these flowers. I'm not going to fill in all these, but I'm just talking through ways of manipulating the color once the pigment is wet on the paper. Really fun. But I'm like leaving lots of space for the green and the blues. So for me, I'm trying to find a nice balance. I have some good pinks going on down here. I might tuck in one little pink flower right here. But I want to have a nice balance of the pink flowers, pink and purples. And I'm going to put lots of beautiful green and blues around. So I'm not being too prescribed today. I'm really just having fun. I'm not being overly attentive to my placements. I'm just having a good time. But I might add like one more little one up here just for a visual balance. And then I'll switch to my greens. But I want you to all be playful with the pink designs. And you can always add in more pink if you want to after. It's no big deal. But I'm doing pinks and purples, dipping my brush in a little water, using the water to fill the colors of the flowers. But again, using your palette to kind of prep your paint so you can see how dark or how light it is really important. I kind of like, ooh, I got some fun blending going on here. I don't know what's going on. This flower does not look like a flower. I don't know what's happening over here. I gotta fix it. I love this punchy red as like a little touch. Oh, it's so cool. Some of these it's like a punch of fuchsia in some spots. The nice thing about watercolors, you can always come back in and add more layers or do some extra, outlining. You can kind of make some choices around how you want to use stronger pigment versus doing some like lighter edges. So it's starting to dry and you can really see these colors starting to formulate together, which is really fun. So I might just let some of these pink ones dry, see what happens, and go from there. I might put one more like of these little petals up here, just kind of coming off for a little bit of a visual balance. I like using the water just to fill in some of these just slightly. And I might just do a few petals kind of going off the edge over here as well. And I think I'm going to call it with the pink for right now. I'm going to let it dry. What are you all thinking so far? Are you having fun? Yeah, it's different, isn't it, than acrylics? Very different. Very different. All right. So if you need more time with these pinks, feel free to take it. I'm going to let them dry so I can think about them a little longer. There are two other kind of types of elements that are in this inspiration today. We have like green leafy like foliage, and we have these like blue, we have these like berries. So I think we'll add some of the berries first. The berries are in like a darker green teal color, and then the leafies, the green leaves are more of like a lighter teal. So find colors that you like, right? So this is a fun opportunity, just like using acrylics, finding the right color and mix of colors for you is important. So I'm going to play over here with trying to find a nice kind of teal color. And to make it teal, it's blues and greens basically mixed together. So clean up your brush as you go and grab from other colors over here on your color set. So I'm just looking for like a teal. Look at that. That is such a fun color. It's like a bluish green. So fun. Now, if you don't have white, you just use like less water. You just add more water to really dim it out. Now, I kind of want it to be a little more green, like a light blue. No, let me see. Take your time and find the right one. I think this will work. I think I just need more water added. So it's the right hue, you know, compared to my pinks. In person, I might try to add a little, I have a little bit of a lime green here. Let's see what happens if I add a little bit of lime green to this. Ooh, came a little more watermelony. That was kind of fun. That might work. But have fun mixing like the pigment color. This is the pigment color for your greens in the background. I'm going back to blues again, but I think this is good. So to get this lighter, I'm kind of creating a secondary area right here. See how much lighter it is in color? It's because I'm using more water with the pigment. See that? So this is how I'm lightening the color. So what I'm going to do is I have this kind of this pure color, this base color that I really like. And you can kind of create, I'm going to create little berries. I kind of might create two. I'm thinking creating two versions, like a darker color, like a bluish color and a greenish color. So let's see. I'm going to put a little bit of blue here. See, they're starting to mix. And I'm going to clean up my brush. And I want like a bluish green for some of these berries. So I'm going to kind of create, if I can, two separate colors. I want it to be a little more blue. So you have to be a little more patient with watercolor when you're mixing your pigments. That's too blue for me, so I'm just going to add a little bit more green. Ooh, interesting. You can kind of manage again how much water, and I'm stirring it around kind of like witch's brew a little bit here. But I'm going to do some berries and like a darker color. So I think this is a good darker color for me. And I'm going to do a couple sprigs first. So I'm just going to have some fun and draw some sprigs. Maybe I'll do some sprig placements first. I'll do a sprig up here. I'll do a sprig down here. And I'll do a sprig here. And I'm just going to have little berries, maybe at the top of each sprig. Let's do some berries. If you don't want to do berries with me, you don't have to. And I can always add blue to these berries, which is really fun. So if I want to, if they're green right now, I can always come in here with a little blue and add a little blue to these berries if I wanted to, which is really fun. So you can be playful with these elements. And this is like this, you can't see it. I'm going to zoom down, see if you can. It has like blues and greens, so the lighting isn't great right there because my phone is covering it. But it has blues and greens kind of in the berries. And it's a little dark, which is fine. I'm okay with that because the colors are really cool. So I'm kind of doing a little bit of a green berry first. And I'm coming in with a little bit of blue. And I'm using the blue to fill the berry. And I'm doing a little bit of blue on the berry sprig itself. So I'm just having fun with playing with the blues and greens for the berries and the sprigs. Again, I do a little berry at the top of the sprig to kind of set the tone. And I'm saving lots of space for the other leaves and foliage too. This was just kind of a fun element. And I'm alternating sides with the berries. Again, having fun bringing in a little blue with the green. And I'm using just the tip of the brush. So for me, I'm going to have these really bold contrasting colors, which will be really fun. And you can see I've played with the direction of the berries. Bring this over a little bit. There we go. And you can leave some white space in these berries. You can fill them in entirely. And I'm just going to rinse and repeat. So I'm using like my greens to do the outline of the berry. I'm leaving a little bit of white space. I'm filling some of it in. I'm connecting the berries to the sprig, alternating from the left to the right. And then with my blue that I've pre-mixed over here, I'm just doing a little bit of a blue to like fill in some of the berries. And I'm bringing some of the blue onto the stem too. So I'm kind of getting like a two-toned colored stem, which is kind of neat. So this is just all like basic experimentation. Everyone's going to kind of figure out what they like about watercolors and what you don't. But I love the fluidness. I love how it blends two colors together so simply. But it just takes a little practice and a little patience. I am leaving a little white space, but I'm trying to be intentional, bringing in a little bit of blue too. Just like I was trying to be intentional of bringing in a little purple to my other flowers. Because when it dries, it's just so stunning to see two colors kind of come together. And that's not used in all watercolor projects. It's really up to the artist to decide what to use and where. But you can start to see everything really come together. I'm going to do a lighter color. So these sprigs look fairly dark compared to the pink flowers. I'm just going to use more water over here to kind of lighten the greens. So I'll use more water over here on my palette for the next step, basically. And the next step is just doing some really light, like wide open leafy greens. So an example maybe, and you could jump into this. And if you want to add more, sorry, before I jump into the next leaf, if you want to add more darker contrasting leaves, you can, like with, sorry, darker contrasting areas with this color, you can. I'm going to jump to the lighter one first. And then, because I can always tuck in more darker leaves if I want to kind of match. But for me, I want to make sure I have these beautiful leafy greens, and these are what they look like to me. They're bigger. They have a point on one end. They have a point on another. They have a line down the middle. See how light that is? It's because I have more water over here. And then they have lots of little V's. So just taking your time. Little V's on one side to the other. You can connect them to a sprig if you wish. So if you wanted to do a sprig coming down like this, put a cute little leaf at the top. It doesn't matter. You could put a big leaf at the top. But I'm leaving some white space. So for me, you can decide as an artist how dense you want your artwork to be with leaves. Look how cute that is. So fun. So the more water you have, and just have fun with this step. Creating the sprig for your leaves is really helpful. Go nice and slow. It's very relaxing. The line down the middle. Play with the direction. Play with the size of the leaves. And there's no rush. And I'm going to show you what that looks like right there. Okay. It kind of looks like wallpaper a little bit. I kind of like it. It's quite pretty. So I have one sprig, and you can determine on how dark or how light these are. Because look, this leaf is really light. So I can come in here and outline this leaf again, following these lines if I want to make it a little darker, right? So it's never too late to change the pigment. You could also add in multiple colors here. So if you want to get a little crazy, I'll show you another. I have a lime green watercolor color. While this leaf is wet, I could add a little bit of lime green. Oh boy, hold on to your hats. Just touched in, and it's giving like a little bit. It's kind of flowing into the veins. A little touch. So fun and different. So while it's wet, you can dot or touch in, just like we did with the purple, other colors. So fun. And you cannot see that. I wish you could. You can see some of it right there. But I put in a little bit of lime green into this leaf here. It's really cool. And it's kind of nice starting with a lighter. And you can do, again, a point at the top, kind of rounded leaf. I do a line down the middle, and then I do those V's, those veins for the V's. Then I have room over here to do another big leaf. Hey, I might as well do another big leaf over here. So those sprigs are really helpful to kind of ground where your leaf and your stick is. And I'm going to come in with a little bit of this lime green again and just do a little touch here and there. And it's going to look so cool when it dries. So neat. You don't even need a lime green. You could use like an emerald green. That would also look really pretty. This lime green is just for a little bit of extra brightness. So I've just completed one. You're just going to go at your own pace, and you're going to tuck in any elements that come to you. So you don't even need to be doing the same elements that I am right now. As you know, these classes are, follow your own destiny per se. If you wanted to do actual leaves off of some of these flowers, you could as well. So like if I wanted to do like a leaf right here and a leaf here coming off of this flower with the same style with the V's, I could. So it's, if you wanted to just do the sprigs, you could do just the sprigs. It's totally up to you. I'm going to do both. So I just did two little ones here. Maybe I'll just do another little one here. All right. You can play with the tips. I'm going to come in with a little bit of lime green to add a little bit of extra brightness. The lime green looks great, but everyone's using different color palettes. So just try to bring in a secondary color if you can. It's really fun to watch those colors blend and merge together like that. But I'm going to do another sprig, just like this one. You can change the angle of your sprigs. Your sprigs don't all need to be up and down. So this one maybe, oh boy, let's see how adventurous I want to be here. And some of these leaves can be pointing down too, so they don't need to be pointing upwards. So what I might do is I might add just like a big leaf down here, kind of like half on, half off the page, and do my sprig kind of coming out this way. So let's do just a sprig coming this way. Then I can kind of build my leaves off of the sprig. And you can pick any direction. I'm using the tip of a brush. So I'm using the same brush. You can use any brush that you want. If you need to change brushes, feel free to kind of check yourself and say, oh, shoot, do I need to change brushes? Feel free to do that if you need to do that. But I love tucking in some of these small ones and the big leaves. Like that's a really fun, for me, I'm enjoying the characteristics that it's bringing. And again, while these leaves are wet, bring in a secondary color to see what that does. I'm going to come in and grab some of this lime green, just tuck it in a little on the edges, a little in the middle. You can decide how dark or how light. And as these leaves start to dry, you can see how the fusion of colors is just like so cool. So, so cool. And with watercolor classes, you could take a long time. Sometimes people let watercolors dry and you come back to it. It depends on the work that you're doing. Sometimes watercolor artists, you paint something, like say you're doing mountains, and you let them dry entirely, and then you come back and you add more detail. Tonight's class isn't necessarily like in that form, but it's more of a simple take of like how to blend colors and how to use them in different ways. But you could easily come back and do second round of detail if you wanted to for tonight's as well, if you wish. You could come in and you could fill in some of these areas once the water is dry. You could come in easily and do additional work. So it's always up to you. I have that there. And you'll figure out kind of what to put and where to fill in the spaces. If you have a lot of extra white space, there are some fun, like little petals that are tucked in. I'll do those after, like little solid petals. I'm just going to focus primarily right now on doing this detail work with these sprigs. So I have some nice fill in down here. I'm going to look up here and say, well, what do I want to do next? So I might do a long leaf over here. And maybe I'll do a sprig coming in this way. So for me, I'm not doing a pattern that is like a bouquet style pattern. I'm more so doing a pattern that is a little here nor there. But I'm maintaining the V's for the veins on the leaves. I'm putting a leaf at the top of the sprig. And I'm doing small leaves and big leaves. So it's up to you. If you wanted to do all big leaves, you could do all big leaves. If you wanted to do all small leaves, you could do small leaves. You're also managing the pigment, like how dark or how light this pigment is. So this one got a little darker. So I could add more white. Sorry, I could add more water, to my palette to make this lighter, which I just did a little bit. Because you can always bring in more pigment. So play with and be mindful of playing with how much pigment are you bringing on initially, and how are you manipulating that along the way. So if you're bringing in a little darkness, if you're bringing in a little bit of a darker green as a secondary, etc. But I'm filling in most gaps. I'm leaving some white spaces for additional work per se. I'll come back in and I'll do some final detail work for some of my other flowers. But again, I'm letting some of those dry and coming back to it. So just kind of work your way around as you wish. Please, again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. If you're enjoying any tea or water or coffee, if you dare to drink coffee at 10 of 5. Don't forget to stay hydrated, enjoy the process. Could do some long and lean leaves. But using a really light hand to do these veins. I like these long, lean ones too. It's like leafy, long, skinny, leafy looking ones. I like tucking the little ones in too. It's a fun little characteristic to add in. Now my lime green is starting to blend in and merge in with my other ones. So I'm gonna have to be careful to hold my colors separate here on my tray. It's getting a little murky here. You can see my blues and greens are starting to mix. I think it's a good acknowledge point is like, it's good to blend colors, but if you wanted to go back to like having just your lime green, right? So if I come back in, I'm saying, Megan, you're going to keep your lime green in this top right corner. Don't you touch that, okay? And then I'm going to put my bluish green again over here in the top left. So you can see, just like how we manage our acrylic paints on our plate, you can do the same thing. It's just about, it's a little more difficult keeping them separate with watercolors. All right. And then down here is my watery play area. So for me, I'm working on these lighter leaves. They're a little lighter in person. They seem a little darker on Zoom. But I'm going to finish these up and then we can walk through additional details. So let's see here. I always do the big leaf at the top or even the top of the sprig. And I'll have this curve down just a little bit. In about 5 minutes, we'll do a little show and tell if folks want to see each other's work. Could certainly do that. I'll keep an eye on the clock here. But tonight's class, I don't see it going past an hour and a half. We'll have some fun. I'll answer questions, but it's really kind of go at your own speed and you're going to know when you're done, right? So some of yours might take a little longer. Some of yours might be done a little sooner. So just always go at your own pace. I feel like watercolors can take longer. It depends on what you're doing and like what the intent is. But it's totally up to you. With a lot of watercolor classes outside of tonight's, you typically let something dry and you come back to it. I don't have that type of like composition tonight, where I'm like letting something dry like as a landscape scene and coming back to it. However, in classes, you may participate or do in the future, or things that you do at home in the future, you may recognize that you want something to dry and then you come back. So that's a very common component of watercolors, if you didn't know that. I'm going to do one big one down here. And again, while this is wet, I'm going to add in my lime green. So I'm kind of doing a little bit of this emerald. I'm going to clean that off. I'm going to find my lime green. I'm going to manage how bold this is. And I'm just going to do a little touch of lime green. It's going to find its way through these little river valleys and canals here of my wet veins of my leaf. And it's just going to add a little bit of extra brightness to some of these areas. It's really fun and different. And again, if something is too light, you can come in and grab a blue and come in and change it. You can come in and find a pigment and you can darken it up in an area if you want. So if you want to add some more contrast, I grabbed a little bit of a darker bluish green, and I'm just tucking it into the designs, and it's kind of finding those canals of the work I just did, and it's kind of steaming through it. So that's really cool to see your work take off in that way. And again, you can leave lumps and dollops of water on watercolor paper and it will dry, just don't touch it. So if I wanted to add some more like blue contrasts to some of these leaves down here, I could outline even. This is where you let it dry and you can come back to it. You can add more detail wherever you want, which is really fun. So I'm just going to do a couple of green leaves kind of going off the sides with my V-like forms. And then I'll show you some additional details we can consider for tonight's class, but we'll do a little show and tell like I promised to. Okay. I'm just having some fun with mixing some additional colors in. Again, thinking about adding in darker or lighter contrasts if you want it. It depends on how you apply it initially, right? To be honest. So I might do maybe one more leaf down here. But once I'm done this leaf down here, I'll stop playing around and I want to actually see how everybody's doing. And folks can unmute yourself and share any commentary on how well it's going or how well it's not going. We are honest people here of our happy mistakes and where we're learning with watercolors. So I'm going to, and you don't want to, and if ladies and gents, if you cannot pick your artwork up, do not pick it up because I don't want it to drip. So I'm acknowledging that. Do not pick it up if there's any wet areas. You can kind of wave your hand over it and give it a minute to dry. Watercolor dries typically pretty quickly. I'll hold mine up a little closer. I have a little bit of a shade underneath my phone here because I'm using my phone in this space. But mine is almost dry, so I'm actually I'll pick it up for you and I'll show here if I can. I'll remove my spotlight so I can see each of you. Let me see if I can turn my light. Let me turn my phone over here so you're not looking down at my feet. But go ahead and show off your work. Terry, how's it going? Nice, ladies. Beautiful contrast. Sharon and Terry, gorgeous. So pretty.
Hi, it's Dory. I can't make my camera work, but I'm finding the biggest challenge is it's almost like I need one brush for each color because then I go back to blend the colors and kind of messed up the palette, especially with the white, and so that's.
I know that is such a good
Better
point.
than I anticipated for a first time. So I give myself that. So.
That is such a good point, Dory, because if you don't consciously go back and you're using a green, you're gonna muck up the blue, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's fun. It's a happy little accident right there, right? We're all learning. What else is working well for folks? I'd love to hear feedback. What you enjoy. Are you guys playing with like taking your pinks and adding a little purple and watching that transfusion happen? Really beautiful.
That's great.
Yeah,
when it dries,
mixing the colors. Yes, it was good to add a little color to one, then another.
So pretty. Oh, I love it. Nice job, Janice. I love it. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. Perfect. Right, I'm gonna hide me because you all don't want to see me. We want to focus on the art, right? All right, so I'm gonna go back and spotlight for everyone. Thank you all for sharing your art. I always love seeing your progress along the way. It's one of the best parts of these classes is to share our work with one another. All right, let me lift this up a little higher. Perfect. So you're gonna start to recognize, okay, how much of this white space do I want to fill in? And one of the things that the original piece did is you as an artist decide what you want to have as a light element and what you want to have as a darker element. So some of you, like Janice, has a lot of really bold, like darker, brighter colors. So as an element to fill in any of the white space, Janice could take softer and lighter pinks and do little smaller leaves kind of tucked into the whiter areas to kind of highlight and to kind of fill in. For me, I could go either way, but there's some additional details I'm going to show you or I want you to consider, and I want you to pick out on filling this in a little bit more. And this is really how we spend the remaining time as things are drying, of course. So I'm going to add additional details to these bigger flowers, just a few details after. But one of the things I'd like to acknowledge is, for me, I could add in, I have a few, my darker areas are like these blueberry sprigs, I'll call them. And I do like that color. So if I wanted to add in any more of that darker blue kind of contrast, I could. And I'll add a little bit more right now. So for me as an artist, I'm making a choice, right? We make choices around what else we want to add and why. So for me, I'm going to add a little bit more darker contrast, just a few small pieces to kind of balance the light and the darks. So for me, I'm just going to add in a little bit more. As I do this, I want you to think, do I want to add any more lighter or darker contrasting areas? I'm just going to tuck in a couple of small leaves here and there to add additional value to the darker spaces. So I'm just going to tuck in a little bit here and there. So there's just a little bit, see how that dark little, those 3 little petals I just added in, it kind of matches some of these blueberries, these blueberry sprigs. And if I wanted to take the same color, this is like a bluish color, darker blue, I can kind of outline some of these blueberry sprigs, the berries, with this color if I wanted it to match. With a little water. Totally up to you. So this is where you figure out what yours might need and where it might need it. I'm going to do all lighter colors after this for my fill-in detail. So let's see, I'm going to put in maybe a little 1, 2, 3 cluster of leaves here with the darkness. Maybe that will be okay. I think that color, the lighting is okay. Give me a thumbs up if the lighting is okay the way it is. Terry, is that all right? Okay. One of my lights just went off, so just let me know. But I'm just adding in a little bit, some little tiny, like 1, 2, 3 leaf clusters. But as I'm adding in clusters, I'm keeping a white space in between things. I'm not putting something like right next to the pink flower and touching the pink flower. I'm really standing clear of that. But I'm doing contrast. A little bit of contrast here and there. And if you don't want to add any additional contrast, you don't have to. I'm just talking through it as an example for you to consider. So I added 1 and 2. I think I'll just add one more little one up here. Kind of coming off the top. And then I'll just do lighter detail as the rest of my fill-in. And the lighter detail for me, maybe lighter greens, even lighter than what I have here, or lighter pinks. And there's a couple different details that you can add in or paint in to give it that subtle, soft, like this is like the background of the wallpaper subtleness. So I'll do some lighter pinks first. The cool thing, the super cool thing about watercolors, hang on, I'm going to turn on another light here. Is when the paint pigment dries on your plate here, all you have to do is add a little bit of water to it and it's going to come right back to life. Isn't that awesome? So you could like let this whole thing dry and then save it. Don't rinse it off. You could add water back to this dried plate next week and you could easily keep painting from that. So it's really fun. I'm just going to do a couple of like round little soft pink circles as like a fun little detail here and there. So I'm just going to do a soft pink circles. I'm going to do more green. as like my background, but I'm just gonna do some soft pink circles just to have fun with a silly little design element. You could do swirls. You could do little stars. This is creativity of just getting in the zone, doing what comes to mind. You can see I just added, I'll bring this down a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. I just added some little circles. But I'm going to do soft green as all my other elements. And you do as much or as little as you like here. Everybody's going to be different. But I'm going to try to find my soft, soft, soft green. Don't want there to be a lot of pigment. So there's little dots you can do for some of your fill-ins. Little dot clusters. And these are so tiny, but I'm going to bring it a little closer so you can see it. See these little dot clusters I added in? And I'm not touching anything around it, but I'm just doing some clusters here and there just to fill in some of the space. And I'm holding it so you can kind of see where I'm doing them, which is really fun. So I did some here. I did clusters of like eight or nine. So I'm just gonna do some dot clusters. And then I might add in some more leaves. We'll see. But you can choose on how you want to fill in any remaining space. But I'm kind of picking one design element and I'm evenly placing it throughout the picture. So I did those little circles first because I just felt like it. And I'm doing little dot clusters and kind of lean back. This is the mindfulness principles of like, being an artist and making choices of what you want to put where. Maybe you want to put some more leaves around maybe some of your pink flowers. So maybe I'll do an extra leaf over here. Right? So just follow your intuition. And if you want to add a leaf, add a leaf. A big leaf, a little leaf. Your leaves don't need to touch your flowers either. They could just kind of be floating nearby. Maybe I'll put in some more leaves up here on this big one. And do the V texture. It's a fairly abstract, scene. It's kind of just building upon the spring and the colors. If you want to add any swirls, you could add some swirls. I'm just going to add some more of these green leaves with the V. So I'm going to just do my dotting in all the places that kind of give me balance with the dotting. And then I'm going to add some more green leaves, I think. So just do whatever ideas that you want to incorporate. There's no right or wrong here. And I'm using like a greenish color. I'm just kind of looking if there's anywhere else that I want to add any more of the dotting before I add more leaves. Because I like the foliage a lot. That was one of the appeals to me with this inspiration was the foliage. So I'm just going to do full floating leaves as foliage, as final details in my white space. They don't need to be connected to a sprig. They could be a solid leaf. I'm trying to do these in a light color. Trying. It's not really working too well. But the leaves are floating, which means they're not touching anything, and they can be big or small. And that's just the detail that I'm going for on how I'm filling this space in. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. But on my plate over here, I have very little pigment happening. I have more water. And you could do bluish green leaves too. You can see some of my blues are, excuse me, coming in here because they're mixing. Just as long as you have enough water, the leaves will stay nice and light. You can put some solid color leaves in too, if you wish, like more like totally filled in. It's up to you. I'll show you what a few of those look like. But this is like really relaxing, right? Because we're all just following our intuition. There's no expectations with what we're doing here. We're finding balance. We're building the scene together. This background detail can be as dark or as light as you wish. It depends on your painting, your composition. And I'll hold this up a little closer so you can see how I'm leaving white space in between each of these elements, but I'm just slowly filling it in. And if some of these elements are too light, I can always go in and darken them. You can't take something darker and make it lighter, but you can always take something lighter and make it darker. If that makes sense from a pigment perspective. And I learned that as I first started doing watercolor. I learned that pretty quickly, of just being a little lighter on the hand. But it takes practice. And if you want to touch in like a little bit of like some blue contrasting colors, or even like where you have things that are wet, you can kind of touch in a secondary color for that bleed. You can do that, right? For that cool blending effect. For any of these background things, these small fill-in colors, you can add in a secondary color, whether it's a green. And I'm just going around and saying, okay, what's still wet, Megan? And then I can come in and make it have a little pop of something or here or there. There we go. But just have fun. You can see this area is really filling in well. I'm just doing some floating leaves, again, big and small. For my fill-in areas, you could do swirls, you could do more dotting. Artists typically pick something and stick to a theme, right? That's what keeps your composition consistent. We'll put a little bit of blue in this one. That will look cool. You could, with a little bit of water, you can kind of move different paint pigments around. Try adding a secondary color. Ooh, it's so cool. Some of these leaves in the distance. Again, having water on your brush with the elements is really helpful. And don't, to Dory's point, Dory's probably grabbed a second brush here, maybe for a second part of class. If not, grab a second brush. Have a brush for every color. Like if that's helpful for you to keep your colors separate, go for it. Absolutely. Use separate brushes if you need to. It's so funny, ladies and gents. Whenever I teach my in-person classes, I watch how people are painting often in these classes, and people will use a single brush for each color. So at the end of an in-person class, somebody might have, 5 brushes in front of them with a single color on each, and they've just used each of those brushes to do each color, and which is totally fine, and typically in my in-person classes I have lots of brushes for people to use, and sometimes folks will use one brush for each color, and versus just using one brush or 2 brushes and cleaning it off. So it's a process for everyone. It depends on your resources. If you have lots of brushes, then go for it. Who cares? But you're going to know when you're done, you're on track, if you want to add any more of this or that. For me, I'm working my way around saying, what additional detail do I want and where? Do I want to put something light or dark within this space? And I love these little floating leaves. Doing big leaves and small leaves will add some really nice character. to your picture and turning the shape. Some of these leaves can be up and down. Some of these leaves can be tilted. That's what's going to add personality. You can add a couple swirls here and there. If there's any other ideas or objects that you want to add in, that would be, you know, fruitful for you. Any objects, even if anybody's thought of something else different, I would love to hear what additional things you may have tucked in. You could do against solid color leaves if you don't want to do the leaves with the V's and the veins. And adding in a little bit of like a secondary color, like a little bit of a blue or a little bit of a like a brighter green to some of these secondaries. Just adds a little bit of a pop, a little bit of a touch. That fusion that happens when watercolor dries. It's like a surprise when everything dries. It's like, ooh, that is so cool. How did I do that? It's usually what I say to myself. How did I do that? That was so neat. So I'm doing pretty well with 3/4 of this. I'm kind of just working my way around the sides and the corners, just doing some leaves that are off the edges. Adding in a secondary contrasting color, maybe if it's a lime green or a darker blue, as like a subtle change. If anybody wants to add a center to any of your flowers, you could. You could keep your flowers simple in pink if you wish. Some of my flowers are pretty dark in color, so I can't add a ton of lightness. I could play with adding a little bit of the white. I actually don't even know what that would do. Let me see what a little bit of like a white watercolor would do. Probably wouldn't do very much, but I could try. I'll experiment here. What if I had a little bit of the white watercolor? Oh yeah, we'll lighten it up a little bit. If anybody has the white watercolor, you could soften some of your petals if you wish with a white watercolor. Totally optional. But you could add a darker, center if you wanted to add a center. If you wanted, the white is actually kind of yeah, so you can play if you have a white, you can play with adding a little bit of white. Most folks, you may not have a white, but I'm just kind of softening here or there. So I'm being playful and trying that. I could do a little tiny purple dot, like a darker purple in the center of some of these if I wish. That's always another option of adding a little bit of a center, a contrast. That's a very common technique for flowers. I'm jumping ahead of myself. I didn't finish all of my green fill, so I'm going to do that really quick, and then I'll show you how to add some of the darker contrasting. Let me finish my greens. I got too excited. We all know how that goes sometimes. And then we'll wrap the class up right around 5:30 just to give folks some time. But I hope you're loving this. It's always so much fun to try different things in these classes. So I applaud you all showing up, being willing to try something different. And I hope you're learning something new. Growth is such an important part of life, and practicing and doing and trying new things. So as always, thank you for being here. You're all a big part of the community, and we wouldn't be able to do this without your support. So I'm so glad that you're here with us and being playful. I'm going to grab a little blue, a little bit of green to get me over the finish line here. I might do a blue shape here with a little bit of green tucked in. But again, I'm just working my way around. Lots of details in this one. And figure out what might be needed where. I think one of the biggest things is just being really deliberate to keep moving your way around. I'm gonna put some dots over here. Moving your way around your picture. Identifying where to stop, where to kind of hold white space. I'm gonna add some more dots over here. I might do a blue circle right here. You can always do some blue circles with your pink circles if you wanted to try that. I like the idea of the swirls too. But holding that padding around each of these is important. I have one more little area over here where I'm just going to finish up my fill leaves. So again, some of my fill leaves are floating. All right. Floating leaves work sometimes when you just kind of have this unstructured spring design. And this is such a great way to kind of enter into spring. I'm just doing a couple of dots here and there. Okay. So I think I have a good amount of fill. I'll show you what it's like if anybody wants to add any contrasting areas to these flower centers. I have a little bit of this pinkish purple here. And I can put in a little bit, the center of flowers are typically darker. So if anybody wants to play with adding in like a little bit of a darker pink or a darker purple, you can play with what that might look like for you. So I'm just starting up here. And you can like take your finger and kind of play with it a little bit. You don't have to do any darker contrast if you don't want to. But if you want to play around with it, you could. Again, I have plenty of water on my brush. You just do a couple of small, like I'm doing a couple of small kind of like purple dots. And I'll get a little bit of water and just do a little bit of bleeding outwards. So you have like a little bit of a look and feel that you like. You don't have to go too crazy. If you do too much of it, you can just kind of use your finger to kind of blot it off. It's a kind of forgiving part of watercolors. You can kind of like, you don't like what happens, you can just kind of, while it's wet, you can kind of blot it with your finger and wipe it off a little bit. And you can figure out how much paint pigment you might need or want. I'm not going to do too much, but I'm just going to grab a little purple here. Again, using your paint palette. I'm just going to do a little bit here and there. I'm just doing little dots, and I can use a little water to kind of help bleed that in too. You can use your finger to move it around. You could use a paper towel. These are some of the choices that you get to make on how much contrast you have. I'm just doing a couple of darker dots, and I'm doing a couple of like lighter dots, like for a little bit of this and that. And you can kind of like let it bleed down. You can be really playful about how you want to incorporate. You can kind of do like you could drag a drop of water down a petal. Like down here, I'm just seeing what happens. It's going to put a couple of, and if it's really wet, just use your finger or paper towel to kind of dab it. If it's too wet. You are in control here. I'm just using my finger because I can. But I'm gonna, and you can let something dry, right? So a lot of these things, we talked about was like letting something dry and coming back to it. For me, I added a bunch of water. But you can see I did some dots up here. That kind of looks cool. So it's just kind of about trying something, seeing what happens, and just rolling with it. And if you don't like it, you just know for next time, or you can change it now while it is wet. You can wipe something up while it's wet. But once it dries, that's it. So I'm having fun with just a little bit of like tiny touches of darkness. So this is too wet over here and it's too purple. It's too boring. So I'm just going to let that dry. I'm going to come in and give it a couple of small darker dots just to see what happens. 1, 2, 3. Play with how much water's on your brush. But you kind of have to lean back in your chair. You just make those choices as an artist, right? Around where you want to add this contrasting detail and where you don't want to add it. A little bit of contrast for the middle of these flowers looks really cool. Like that one came out really neat. I'll hold it up a little closer. I did tiny little dark purple dots. Well, it was just dry enough where it's taking off. I just did it down here too, and it's holding. And it's kind of giving a little bit of a starburst effect. So if you like that, you can do it. If you don't like it, you don't have to do it. I'm just here to show you what it's like to be a little playful here. And this is the point where we're in the class where you can call yourself done. You can let it dry, right? Let's be honest. You can let it dry and come back to it, which is what a lot of people do with watercolors. This purple in the middle is really nice, but I'll pause. Awesome. Looks like Dory sent me a message. All right. So I'm going to ship this over. I would love to see how everybody's doing. I think I'm happy with where mine's at. So I'm going to gently peel the tape off so you can see what it looks like with the clean edges. And then I'd love to see how folks are doing. You're welcome to take more time if you want to take more time. There's no rush. But I thought this was a blast. I want to thank you all so much for being here. Peel this back here.
Oh, I love yours. I love mine, Megan. I love them.
Yay! So glad. So glad. I love it. I thought it was so much fun. We'll do this again.
I did too. It was great fun. I love the watercolor. Good.
Woohoo! Thank you. I love it. Yeah, we'll do another watercolor this summer for sure.
Good. Good.
All right.
Thanks,
So look at-
Megan. Here's mine. I have
right.
never done anything ever watercolors, so I bought like a
Yay.
$6.99 Michaels set, and it was just a lot of fun.
Nice. Very nice.
You don't need to buy fancy stuff getting going. You really don't. And I just love making that really clear. But good, Janice. I'm so glad you had a nice time. I'm going to go ahead and hit pause on the recording. For anyone watching the recording, please reach out with any questions. Thanks.